What's up, dudes? Welcome back to another episode of Rhomas Men's Team. Pretty simple. We are a group of guys helping each other make progress towards each other's goals. If you're new to the channel, awesome and welcome. If you want to help support the channel and join our pro team, head over to rhomasteam.com/pro, where you can contribute to us on a donation basis. We also give you access to exclusive content, mastermind groups, etc., etc. So anyway, hope you enjoy this episode, and we'll see you on the team. Rhomas Men's Team, we are back in action. Pretty simple. We help each other make progress. Super straightforward. Mr. Rob, what's going on, brother?
Not much, man. How are you?
Doing great, man. I invited MFG up here as well. Welcome to all of the new guys here, and so we've got a handful of new guys. How it works here, we will randomly bring you guys up unless somebody raises their hand and says, hey, I want to come on. We're happy to consider having you guys on. Don't feel any pressure, and then just know that these are posted to YouTube. So, if you just be careful, if you say anything, you can always let us know to delete them. But we want you guys to feel comfortable sharing. All right, Rob, I wanted to bring up something that I thought was pretty interesting before we get into your class that you're attending. But probably every day, like throughout like the cracks of time, I spend, I don't know, probably an hour to 2 hours every day, like just trying to learn new things. And Jordan Peterson had this great interview with Robert Greene, who was the author of the 48 Laws of Power, of the 50th Law on 50 Cent, and a handful of other phenomenal books. And Jordan Peterson brought to light this paradox called the bad boy paradox, and he got this from an evolutionary psychologist. I think his name was David Buss, who talked about this particular pattern. And I was always kind of curious about this. And it was basically how we all know, like some of the girls in high school, right? They're super attractive girls in high school got attracted to the knucklehead bad boys who it was very obvious to us that these guys were going nowhere, right? If that makes sense. But for some reason wasn't obvious to the female. Rob, have you experienced that? Like, do you know that paradox or that pattern?
Yeah, I mean, I've observed it in my own life, but seen that same podcast.
Yeah. So apparently it's a thing, and it's called the bad boy paradox. And the way Jordan Peterson articulated it says that young, naive women are attracted to this Machiavellian type. But when they get older, they can see through that act. The reason they are attracted to this reckless, fearless behavior is because those men mimic real, fearless competence. And young women at a young age are not good at distinguishing between the two, which is really fascinating. That's the first time I've heard it like succinctly defined like that, but it's specifically that mimicking. And the reason I'm bringing this to the table is like, oftentimes as men, we have a question of like, well, how do we get confident? Or how do we, attract the opposite sex? How do we do whatever? And oftentimes I think it comes down to like some of these books are telling us to mimic the type of persona that you would display a certain level of confidence. But what I would suggest is actually go inch by inch and acquire the competence so you don't have to mimic the end result. Because at the end of the day, if you're mimicking the persona of like sort of the end game, then you lack the muscle tissue that inevitably will be found out in the future. So if you're trying to act like the big baller guy, but that actually don't have the skill to do the stuff, then that game ends out real quick. If you're acting like the competent, strong male, but then you're actually not, the female will find out in the future. So Rob, what's your perspective on that? And MFG, just so you know, I invited you up here multiple times. I'm not sure if I'm going to try to accept it. Anyway, Rob.
He's poolside. He's poolside in Miami.
Always, dude.
But yeah, no, I think that that's spot on with what you're saying, of course. I mean, I don't know if anyone else has experienced it, but I have in my life where things are going my way, and I definitely feel like I can do anything. Like I'm unstoppable. But I feel like people can also sense that. And then if things don't go your way, your confidence gets rattled, then you're not going to get things to go as much as your way as much as they had been in the past. And it's like if you're just living on this false sense of confidence, it may work for a period of time. And I still think it even works into adulthood for a period of time. It's just that it's not going to be long lasting. And then eventually you're like building a house of cards. And you can like I can see a person or an individual that's a guy who a lot of girls are attracted to, but like it's like this isn't the real deal. Like I feel like I can detect that. And if you're actually going to be someone of whatever they call it, a high value man, then you don't have to ever
Mhm.
be insecure about what's going to happen. You're not super sensitive to what's going on in your environment to where one day you're on top of the world, the next day you're not. It's like this roller coaster. And some people will even go to like a dark place, right? I mean, I feel like that's pretty common too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's this concept of how can we boil it down even to be more simplified? Like mimicking versus earning. Is that like a fair, right, like synthesized view of this? Like instead of focusing on mimicking, how about you earn? But I do think it probably requires more precision than that because I do think things require a bit of mimicking. Like for instance, as I hate saying this out loud, but like as a dancer myself, right? Like the way that I go out and acquire new skills in dancing is I will watch the instructor and then try to mimic them. So there's that fine line of like what's the appropriate zone of where you should be mimicking and practicing, but where you're not overhyping or hyperbolizing to a degree where it's just inauthentic. Arjuno, can you relate to that? What's your perspective?
Yeah, yeah, I really appreciate this subject because it's like I think that so many people are so confused and so lost that you really could kind of apply this and be relatively successful in this grand scheme of like society. But like in this group, people really being self-aware, trying to look at stuff, like it can get you, I would imagine it could probably get you places and get you a lot of stuff, but like yeah, you would always kind of be losing a little part of, or there'd be an unfulfilled part of yourself that you haven't really gained. Um, but yeah, yeah, it's kind of I think it's a fascinating subject because it's like you can get the end goal outcome result, but then what part of your intuition is like, okay, well, is this really enough, or am I not satisfied? Do I really like? Can I really feel that I'm not getting the wholehearted, fulfillment through the actual discipline rather than the fake it till you make it?
Yeah, yeah. And I wonder, so like, because I'm always trying to think of like actual, like precise terms, I wonder if there's, that term of like zone of proximal development where it's, let's say roughly 10 to 20% outside of your current competence zone is a reasonable surface area to stretch for. So if you're a few inches away from dunking a basketball, right, like it's reasonable to assume that you can probably acquire that skill in the next like couple months. But if you're 3 feet away from dunking a basketball, it's probably just delusion that you think you're going to be able to acquire that in the next 3 months. So I wonder if there's an answer there of like, you know, of expectation within reason, but that's a far cry from if you read, certain books that basically talk you into a level of delusion and where everybody else can see it around you, but you're convinced because this guru is telling you like, oh, just fake it till you make it. Rob, what are your thoughts, bud?
I think that would be fascinating if someone could find like a Goldilocks zone of where it's like where you should actually mimic like to what percentage. But I almost wonder if that's like an impossible thing to do. Like, oh, you only got to be mimicking 20% confidence and 80% real confidence. But I do think that honestly, having confidence, whether it's real or fake, is better in general. Like I've seen people that have a sense of confidence that it's like almost fake to the point to where what are you so confident about? I'm like, not to be judgmental, but there are many people I know who I think have an easier life because they kind of have this delusion of confidence. And if you have to mimic it, I almost feel like it's better than mimicking than being too down on yourself. And then I
Mm,
think people don't realize that it's easier like when you actually have conversations with people and hear about what they're going through. I think that that really helps people understand that, hey, everyone's got problems and it's like easier to be confident. That's why this group is so great, because we'll start a subject and then someone shares and then it's like, oh wow, that's very similar to what I'm going through. I kind of feel a bit more confident that it's not just me going through this. But I think that that's a tricky thing, right? Like how much of it should you, because do you think it's better to fake it till you make it, or do you think it's better to earn it and then get confident once you've earned it?
Yeah, so my personal view is I don't like the fake it till you make it. I actually think work as hard as possible so that internally it's like, okay, I do think I could dunk the basketball within the next few months if I keep on working here, right? Like, or hey, if I like, I don't know, maybe that's just me being too hard on myself, but I don't think I should have confidence in a certain area if I haven't accomplished something at least similar. Let's say like within that 20% zone. Does that make sense? And then I think the
Mm-hmm.
nucleus should be reasonable. Like, what am I trying to be confident in? Is it am I trying to be confident that I'm going to acquire this thing that's way outside of my reach? I think that's delusion personally. But can I be confident in that, hey, I can try at that and know at the end of the day that I'll still be fine? Right? Do you know what I mean? So, like, where's the source of confidence? What am I trying to be confident in? I can be confident in that I can go and take that risk and that everything will be okay at the end of the day. That is different, in my opinion, than, oh, yeah, I could definitely go do that thing over there because this book said that I could. And then, like, I think there's that's where like reality meets delusion. Um, so I'll stop there, Arjun. Let me throw you the mic. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, it makes me think of this. I'm gonna butcher it. It's not verbatim, but Rumi said this. It's something along the lines of, "We have all the potential and inherent ability inside of us already, but the people who understand that have a quicker time accessing it." So I think that there is something like, for example, like when I started doing fighting MMA for a brief period, if I pretended to not be the, like, because I'm like you, I'm like, I need to fucking earn this. I need to like cut my teeth on all this stuff so I can really get it. But then there'd be times where I'd kind of experimentally be like, well, what if I just told myself I was good at this thing rather than just really
Mm,
etching in my ego identity of like, well, this is who I am and I need to go this route. And then just for a moment, almost just pretending like, no, I'm good at this. I know how to do this. And then almost seeing that it actually does kind of help me in that moment. But I think the key is to not get, like, you can get the reward from that, but not to kind of get delusional by it. Like, I think about the same thing with alcohol. Like, alcohol has such a good potential if you have a drink or two because it can open you up, but you have to, like, use that experience and work with it. And I think the same thing is the fake it till you make it. Like, you can't just ride off the coattails of that vibration. You have to kind of like learn from that attitude that you're shifting out of and then kind of grow off of that from the attitude that we already like have instilled.
got it. Yeah, and Arjun, I'm not sure if it's Rob. Are you hearing Arjun's audio a little staticky?
Yeah, it's a little like,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're okay,
Actually,
man.
my girlfriend has a mic. Next time, I'm just gonna have it all set up. So I know y'all praised someone who had a mic the other day, so I'm just gonna get that set up.
Yeah. So no, because that's a good point because there's an alter ego concept out there that, from my understanding, is like somewhat popular in like the very high performer world, whether it be like Beyonce using Sasha Fierce as her alter ego because in order for her to get up on stage and do all these moves and be as like bold as she is, that was very much in contrast with her like hardcore Christian upbringing, from my understanding. So she kind of had to like create a new identity. Same thing for Kobe Bryant with the Mamba mentality. I even think Michael Jordan did it. I think there's a whole laundry list of high end performers who've done what you're saying, Arjun. If I'm hearing you right, so yeah, I wonder how that fits into the puzzle. I do wonder though if that still fits into the category of like, even if you're pretending to be Michael Jordan, if that's the alter ego that you put on when you go out and play basketball, if there's still a version of like you still know that you're I don't want to say pretending, but like you know that you're going into that mode, and that if you don't win the NBA championship next week, that you're probably not disappointed. Do you know what I mean? Versus there's like this category of delusion that I'm just not that for some reason gives me like an ick factor. Do you know what I mean, Rob? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I wonder if, but the thing is, I wonder if that's like their survival mechanism to get to that level of success. Like, do you think that someone like Kobe, who had all the confidence in the world, even though it wasn't like he was the greatest, he knew he could become the greatest through his work ethic. Do you think that the Mamba mentality was able to propel him to a certain level of success that he couldn't have otherwise gotten to?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, what comes to mind for me is like you have the Kobe Bryants of the world who can use that alter ego to very much their advantage, but then you have, I don't know, all of the multi-level marketers of the world who who feel like that's the image that I get in my head. I'm not talking trash on that whole industry, but that seems to be like the running theme for me of like, right, you have these people who are now caught in this purgatory and just spending more money for years and not producing any results, and it feels like they're caught in that sliver. But I could be wrong. I mean, definitely change my mind if you think I'm being derogatory or off here. um, but it's almost where it's like, hey, yeah, if your alter ego is not being backed up by some sort of reasonable reconcilable work effort, then it's delusion. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think in Kobe's case, it's like his alter ego, the reason he was able, or I mean, I don't even know if he has an alter ego. I just feel like I've heard many, many, many people, like I'm a big, big sports fan, and the psychology of sports is fascinating because
Yeah,
I don't think the layman understands the mode that a lot of these athletes get into when they take the field. Like I've heard people be like, he's the nicest guy. He hits the field and he's a killer. And then he gets off and
yeah,
he wants to give you a hug. And like I think a lot of these people, including Kobe, well, especially Kobe in this capacity, was like he was confident in his ability to outwork you. Like you hear him talk about it all the time, like I'll outwork you. No one's gonna outwork me. There's like I mean, I love hearing Kobe stories, but amongst the
yeah.
league of the NBA, you hear like LeBron versus Kobe, and obviously there's a debate there, but all of the NBA players that played against them both just had this feeling that when they were playing against Kobe, it was like a different person. Like Tiger Woods, same thing. Like people were intimidated by him, and I almost wonder if that level of confidence they had almost even propelled them beyond what they could have been, but it's almost false. Or I should say it's almost like manufactured, or it seems like in that mode when they do have that performance driven experience that they're going to be able to perform better. And it might even be something that makes the others confidence get lower, and that also benefits them because now that gap gets greater. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Arjuna,
This
what's your perspective?
Yeah, this whole subject, like, or this right where we're talking about, I can't stop thinking about UFC. Like, it's so, I don't know if anyone knows who Kamaru Usman is. He was like the middleweight, had the
Yeah.
middleweight belt. Like, I think he's the best. But like, if you actually listen to him talk, that guy is a masterclass on self-awareness and vulnerability. It's incredible. But the way he described what we're talking about for each individual fighter is calling it actualizing their destiny. So he's like all fighters, especially on that highest level of caliber, they're all completely delusional. They all know that they're the best because you have to do that to be on that caliber of one-on-one physical like challenge against one another. And yeah, so like I love that, the idea of actualizing your destiny. You're so delusional to where it reaches this like what's it like this critical point where you're like, no, this is it. And he speaks towards that in his own life of like being like, yeah. But I mean, again, like that's kind of a specific thing because those people have so much work ethic and like so much discipline. So it's like it kind of fits the delusion.
Yeah. Is there an element, and I'm down for being swayed on either side here. I think it's important to talk through these types of things because I think a lot of guys deal with them. Um, is there an element of like, hey, you can be delusional because, like, as we say on the team, like, if your North Star goal doesn't make people laugh, right, because they think you're crazy, then it's not a big enough goal. And I firmly believe that. What I'm thinking is, well, for me personally, I better be backing that up. So I could tell Rob I want to be a billionaire, but if he comes and visits me on a random Tuesday, am I working? Do you know what I mean? Like, am I doing what I'm capable of now so that it puts me on, like, at least the right trajectory or right angle to get to that particular island versus saying, hey, I want to be a billionaire, but then I'm playing video games all day. And then Rob catches me doing that. And I just say, no, trust me, man, like, I'm manifesting this stuff. Do you know what I mean? Right
Yeah.
there's this, like, so what, Rob, what comes up for you when I say that pattern out loud?
Well, because I do think that there's the delusion aspect is probably worse for 95% of the people than it is good for the other five. So like
Mm, mm,
if you're delusional but you still are an extreme performer and your delusion is to be like to that next level, then maybe it is a good thing. But I do think that self-awareness is probably a better way to do it. So like if you're falsely confident and it's preventing you from progressing, then I definitely think you need to be more self-aware. But if you're also lack of confidence is what's causing you to be stuck in a rut, I guess I think having fake confidence would be better life overall and potentially help you get into better situations in life, like get the job because you're confident even though you might not, versus the guy who is less confident. I mean, it's a tricky situation because there are times where I feel as if when you aren't as confident, things just really don't go your way. And it's not
yeah.
because anything's different. It's for sure your confidence isn't low. Like I've had lulls, pros and cons. Like I remember being in high school thinking to myself, like, why would that girl want to date him and not me? Like, why are they going to win, not me? And it was like I had
Mm,
such a, I guess, high level of testosterone or whatever it is. Like I truly thought that I was like God's gift to the earth. And I don't think that's good either, but I do think it's better than thinking you're no good, thinking that everyone's better. Like, why is she going to date me? Like that sort of thing. So it's an interesting concept. Like, for instance, do you think the guy in high school that has that false sense of bravado has a better life than the guy who's a realist and doesn't have that sense of confidence, Wes?
hmm. Yeah, it's a good question because what comes up for me is, like, do you think more goals are won because of thinking beyond one's capabilities, or do you think more goals are lost because of people falling short, like trying to be air quotes realistic? Do you know what I mean?
Do you think it depends on the person? Is it one way or another, or is it like a just dependent upon who you are?
Seems like it'd be
Yeah,
substantial.
yeah, I could agree with that. But Daniel, welcome, brother. It's the first time we had you on, man. Thank you for having the guts to come on here, bro. I know it's randomly invite some dudes up. Um, Daniel, first, why don't you introduce yourself if you're cool with it? And again,
Yeah.
we post all of these to YouTube as you probably very well aware. So I want to make sure I respect your boundaries. So keep that in mind. But Daniel, introduce yourself and then weigh in on the topic if you're cool with that, brother.
What do you guys like for an introduction? I'm Daniel. I'm 32. I'm a new dad. Uh,
Heck
Oh,
yeah,
got a
man.
congrats, man.
Perfect.
1 year old boy. He's a grown man in my eyes already. My wife treats him very gently. Uh, so
That's
yeah,
awesome.
that's where I'm at.
Yeah, congratulations. Where are you from, brother?
I'm from Tennessee, but we relocated to Florida.
This is what's just so crazy to me about the internet. I know I sound like, like I'm 95 years old right now, but it's like the fact that the internet can bring people together that's just like not from across the street is just wild to me. Um, so
That's pretty
Daniel,
cool.
welcome to the team, brother, and congratulations on being a dad and the newfound responsibility that you have. Um, if you don't mind weighing in on the topic here, like, for you, what comes up with, where do you land on the spectrum? Hey, should I be dreaming and, like, and trying to act towards that dream, or should I be, quote, realistic and say, well, here's just what I'm capable of. I know it, but I'm also then taking the risk of, like, maybe I don't know what I'm capable of. Does that make sense? What's your perspective?
Yeah. For me, I think To be honest with you, I try to balance those two things, because it's easy for me to like I'm a thinker in the sense that like I can expend a lot of energy just thinking. So I enjoy fantasies where I'm like revolutionizing politics or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
So I think it's one part for me. Like I have these giant North Stars, and maybe I'll have like three or four that are like insane. Like I hesitate to tell almost anyone about them.
Yep.
And then
Love
other
it.
ones that are like, what can I do right now that even if I may not be able to necessarily see the path from my next step to this North Star, what's the next thing I can do to advance like where I'm at right now, and kind of trust that the next step is headed towards one of these things, because I've kind of framed my life around these themes.
I think what you said earlier, and RA just brought it up. I think you hit the nail on the head. This is why I love having like roundtable discussions, because it helps me clarify my own thought processes. And so I think it was you who said like, you know, the core point being the intention of the mimicry. Fake it till you make it, to grow, but not to deceive. So I think I really like that, like, because I agree with you, man. I very much sit in a delusional world, what many people might consider to be a delusional world, like the things I actually want to do in life. But for me, that's worked, right? And this is not some sort of like weird humble brag, but like the things that I've already like experienced in my life, if I would have gone 10, 15 years back, my peer group would have said like no chance, like absolutely zero chance. You can't come from there and get to there, blah, blah, blah. So I like sitting in that pocket of like, no, I'm going to set these goals so that people should be laughing to them, that I should be hesitating to even speak them out loud, because it's almost embarrassing, right? Because my friends would look at me like, oh, that's crazy. So I like your distinction of like, hey, take on that alter ego, and as long as you're not deceiving people, because I think that's where you get into like snake oil salesman, con artist sort of thing. Arjuna, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I just also remembered something that someone told me a while back of like, if you have a dream or you have a future goal, that if you talk about it, then your emotional body can't really discern the positive feeling between actually achieving it and just talking about it, because you feel the same feelings because you're inspired. So if you talk about it too much and you don't act on it, then you give yourself those feelings so much that it kind of takes the wind out of your sails. So like those North Star goals, like I'm victim of this, man. Like, remember I set the goal with the freestyling and all that stuff. Like, unless I'm actually doing it, I can't really talk about it. Otherwise, I give myself too much satisfaction and I become delusional. And I'm like, yeah, I get the feeling like I did it, and then just like it just kind of tapers off.
Yeah, I think Andrew Huberman talked about this. Like, this is an actual thing where if you say it out loud too much and you get the feedback from like the audience, or like, oh man, that's amazing, then you get these dopamine hits that almost gives you that satisfaction. So you actually don't have to go out and do the thing.
Yeah.
Which is pretty crazy. Like, it's a pretty crazy pattern. I think probably we've all experienced it. Rob, have you ever experienced that or noticed that pattern out there in the world?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Like if you're getting the dopamine from something that's mimicking the actual desired goal, then your ability to want to do that desired goal is significantly less. Like, and I don't mean to make this crass, but I think an analogy we can all relate to here is like, if you're home alone, you have some time to yourself, or like, hey, let's take a minute to like go have an orgasm. It's like after that potential situation, your desire to go out that night to meet someone is significantly lower, because you got the dopamine hit or with the satisfaction of whatever without actually having to work for it. So I think that that's potentially a situation we all have, right? Like, if you're like, because I feel like we're all the same. I have like super high goals too. Like in my head, it's like, hey, is this fantasy or is this reality? But then the reverse is also true. You see these people that are massively successful, and they always say, dream big. It's possible. Everybody's going to say no. So you're going to be able to make it if you believe. So it's like this constant. I don't think you can get to where you want to go if you want to be a superstar or a mega performer without having that true belief in self that you're going to get there, whether it's delusional or not. I just think it's required to get to that level personally, unless you're just extremely gifted and you're a phenom or whatever. But I feel like anyone who's mega successful has always told me to like dream big.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's
I agree.
I think you want to dream big, but you don't want to like live in the fantasy because then you're just getting. I feel like there are times where I'm like, oh, I'm having a like I'll daydream, right? Everybody does, and like I can't ever tell if it's. I've literally had this thought within the past week. I'm like, hey, is me visualizing this a good thing, or is it giving me the satisfaction of being in that moment without actually executing what I need to execute?
Is there an element of the occasional real talk or check-in that could either come from yourself or from a good friend or etc., where it says, hey man, like you've told me about this vision and dream, I'm in full support, but just by the way, you're not doing the things that you're capable of doing right now to get there.
Yeah, oh, for sure. Like you're big on that. I mean, it's tough because it's. I think we can all agree social media is an aspect to success in business, at least what I do, especially in the market conditions that I'm in with the market. So like sometimes I think to myself, maybe I do need we were talking about the alter ego situation. I'm like, bro, sometimes these people like kind of sell their souls to the devil. Do they have an alter ego just for the sake of being able to put on the performance on Instagram because it's so forward facing? I genuinely want to help people though. Like my whole goal is to prevent people from being deceived. And I'm sure we've all been on Instagram and seen something that's in our wheelhouse or in our profession and it's just terrible advice. And you want to be the guy to like help these people, not potentially hurt these people. But that requires a certain level of performance.
Well, yeah, let me ask you this, and Daniel, I'd love to get your thoughts. So, okay, let's it seems like we're all on the same page, okay, makes sense to have the North Star goal. At least that's the way I'm interpreting this. So, for me, my philosophy, you have the North Star goal, it should be pretty radical. Because why? Because my view is like you only have one life. So what the fuck? Like, why would you not? And the people who I admire, who are achieving certain levels of rewards and contribution to society, quite honestly, why are they any different? Right? They just did all the work, so I just want to do that same work. And then have check-ins with myself of saying, okay, what like am I actually doing those things right now that would be congruent with that path? Um, so Daniel, if you don't mind me saying, like, hey, if you took inventory of your North Star goals right now, are, and if you don't mind sharing them, that'd be amazing. If you're not comfortable, that's totally cool too. But like, what are the things that you could be doing that are in the direction of those North Star goals, and are you doing them? And you can be as specific or vague as you're comfortable with.
Yeah, well, it's funny because this is just the wrong time to ask me this question because about a month ago, kind of what I think Rob was saying, or no, our Gino was saying, I realized that. So I will be a little bit vulnerable here,
Yeah.
though. I grew up on Adderall, and I wanted to be like the best author anyone's ever seen, but on Adderall, I couldn't shut the fuck up. So I would just talk about what I was writing all the time, and I found that I would just lose steam. I would like get halfway through something, lose steam, and like have to move on to something else. So my North Stars they're private. I'm like harvesting energy for them. But I read this quote the other day, and I'm trying to remember. I think it might be Jung who said, "If the path before you is clear, it's probably someone else's." And so I think to myself often, like, I'm not necessarily a religious person, but I am a faith-based person. And so I kind of just have to trust that like the things that have assembled around me are kind of guiding me in the right direction. Because, and maybe this is a cop out, but frankly, like I don't know clearly what the steps are to achieve some of my more grandiose dreams. So I put in a lot of effort where I see signage, but I couldn't tell you that I have a like step-by-step roadmap from here to there, and that what I'm doing right now will lead to here in a clear way. I think that a lot of times and this may not be true for people that are more systematic thinkers than me, but I think a lot of times you don't understand the value of something you're doing until years later when you look back on it and it's contributed to where you're at right now.
Is there somewhat of like a loose heuristic that someone could use in replacement for very clear sequential, right, like mapping? So for instance, hey, I might not know the next steps or the next 20 steps, but I know that video games is probably not on that list. Do you know what I mean? Is there like a rough boundary there? Yeah.
I think distraction is probably your best category there. Like, am I putting intentional effort into something, or am I wasting, or am I like trying to make time go away?
Right. Well said. Phenomenally well said. Completely agree. Because I think we can all relate to that. Hey, I've got this North Star goal, and if you caught me in an honest moment, I maybe know 5% of the path to get there. And that 5% is maybe questionable, but I could for sure say that, like, if it's between this and watching a movie, I could probably take a better guess of the actions to get there than watching a movie. Arjuna, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, actually, is anyone familiar with Stephen Pressfield? He wrote the book.
Pressfield, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
War of Art.
Yeah. I was introduced to him through this YouTube video I stumbled on. It was called How an Artist Turns Pro, and I would recommend it to the highest degree for everyone. It talks about all of this stuff, and he's talking about resistance is like this invisible force that stays alive by keeping us distracted. And the whole idea is you have to, like, being a professional isn't a matter of making a means of income. It's actually a mindset. And you know that, like, even if you don't feel like doing the work, once you force yourself to start doing the work, then the inspiration starts flowing. And he's saying how resistance is using literally everything it can to keep you from doing the work. And you can tell when you're not on your path as a creator, or the goals that you've set, is if you're putting energy into, like, creating dramas in your relationships, or if you're drinking more, or if you're eating more indulgent foods, or playing more video games. And the whole idea is to kind of, like, always be aware of resistance slipping through the back door to keep you from your focus.
Yeah, and what's really interesting for me is a guy on the team here. I'm going to see if I can bring him up. Phil is almost an example of the opposite of this, right? Like, and he's coming up right now. So this is how powerful work can be. What's up, bro? This is how powerful work can be. That no matter how many times we or I tell Phil that he's a beast, like, very few people on this planet can make a video game and then actually get paid for it, or insert whatever passion and actually get paid for it. It's as close to zero as you can get. But here's a guy who refuses to give himself credit, almost refuses to admit, right, like, anything of benefit for himself. But when he actually just does the work, despite his hatred of, like, or his disbelief in his ability, the work then proves the rewards. Does that make sense? Like, that's how profound Stephen Pressfield's message is, of, like, mood likely follows action and results follow action. And the mood is almost negotiable. Phil, what's your take?
Yeah, I hope you guys can hear me. I'm not.
Yep.
I might be in a lag area. But hey, Daniel, did you say you wrote like half a book and then you had started struggling? Is that what you said?
Yeah, a couple times.
So
that's like one of my biggest
half books already.
That's like one of my biggest challenges right now is like with creative stuff. I don't know if you said those were novels or they're fiction. Right? Yeah, like with creative stuff, like, I don't know, man. It's so hard for me. Like I'm almost getting into my head about it, kind of, because basically with my last game, like I kind of just, it was pretty unfinished in a lot of ways. Like, even though it's like, people like it and stuff, I kind of left a lot of the end of it like very up in the air in a lot of ways. And you can kind of get away with that with video games. Obviously you can't get away with that nearly as much with books because people want, like, a satisfying ending, right? Like, but even I'm pretty unhappy with the way I left it. I didn't really tie it up the way I should have. And like, it's really, really hard for me, man, because like I always want to do really creative stuff, like very like, new stuff that I'm like making up all the parts myself and stuff and not like copying other things. And like when you do that, you're really just like stepping out into like nowhere, like no man's land, where you're just like, you just have to figure shit out yourself, and it's really hard to me. Like I really get in my head, I get really inconfident, I get all fucking self-conscious, and I get all like I just get like very like I don't know, anxious and nervous and think like, oh man, I don't know what to do. And then I like, because I feel like I don't know what to do, like I just believe that narrative, and that becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy because I believe it so much, because I'm like, I don't know what to do. But the real thing underlying all of it is just fear. It's just like the fear of, I think really the basic thing is just fear of trying something and then realizing it doesn't work, and then being frustrated that I wasted that time. And that's like, honestly, I think one of the biggest like Achilles heels of game developers is it takes an enormous amount of effort to do things, and a lot of things you do aren't going to work out, so you need to just throw them away. And that is the most like disciplined thing you can do as a game developer, is to make something and be like, this sucks, it didn't work, I acknowledge it didn't work, and I'm going to throw it away. Or even if it worked a little bit, throw it away and start over and do it again, because then it'll be way better the second time,
How do you know it's not going to work if you don't get the chance to let people play? Because they determine whether it works, right? Not you?
No, I don't really work that way. I mean, I'm not just, it's a synthesis, right? It's not just, oh, well, if people like it, then that's enough for me. That's not, I don't work that way. I'm like halfway between
people.
What?
If people like your game and you don't think it's your best work, I can totally get that. But I guess the reality is, if you're providing joy for people and you don't think it's your best work, you don't think that's a win?
No, I don't think that's a win. No, it's just too easy. It's too easy to make. If you do that with entertainment, you can lower the bar until it's just negative. It's not even on the ground. It's like, it's in, like, people make entertainment products that are just worse than worthless, in my opinion, when they lower the bar that way. You have to have your own standard. You have to have your own standard of what you will and will not do. And unfortunately, like a lot of people who are creative, I'm in a place where I forget who said this. This is a very good point someone made, that like when you start out with creative stuff, like if you have good taste, your taste is very high and your skill is not. So it's a very difficult place to be in, because you want to make very good stuff, and that's important to want that, but you're not good enough to achieve that. But I can't just lower the bar. Anyways, I've totally lost my train of thought. I don't want to keep rambling, but
well, let me throw something in here, just as a very positive jab to Phil. Daniel, if you wrote a book, let's say that book that you've been working on for years, and you were to sell $7,000 of that book, would you feel like, oh, like, okay, like I moved the needle, like I like that's a point in the positive bucket?
I'm gonna agree with you begrudgingly, because I recognize that as the way. But I have to admit, I'm more in Phil's camp, where when I make something that's not up to my standard, if people like it, I can have a bad attitude about it still.
That's so interesting. I wonder if you guys, and respectfully, I'm curious about this, like, because I do hear both sides of it. Like, for when Phil's talking about, I do hear, and Phil push against me if I'm wrong here, I do feel like there's an element of like market agreeability, market feedback that says, hey, the thing that you made is useful for us. So I do feel like that's still a slice of the pie. I also hear that there's another slice of the pie that's saying, hey, but I don't just I want it to be the Venn diagram of useful for the market, the people that I want to serve, and also something that I'm proud of. Like, I'm not willing to create something that just the market likes that I don't really care about, right? But I'm also not hearing completely on the other side that I only need to meet my intrinsic needs, irrespective of what the market says. Does that make sense?
I have a question.
Yeah,
because I feel like with Phil and Daniel, it's cool that you guys can agree, and I have a feeling you guys are both creative, and I respect the fact that you guys both started something, because to me, I have like the inverse view. It's like I'm afraid to start because I don't know how, but once I start something, it's hard for me not to finish because I want to see the end result. But I feel like if I find commercial success, and even if it's not to my standard, that just makes me raise my own bar for the next thing I do. But at least I was able to help people provide joy or some commercial success or some wins under my belt to where now starting the next project, I might have a bit more confidence. I'm just curious as to like how you guys decide to start. Like what gets you going to start it, and where do you find that sort of like desire or confidence to start? Either one.
I mean,
Not all at once.
it's just starting is just, I don't know, just having an idea that's compelling, you know. I don't know. You know, I have a billion, because like I said, I'm extremely motivated by wanting to do new things, and I have tons of ideas for video games that I actually really, really would love to play the game, but they're not like new enough. So I can't, even some of them seem like they'd be extremely fun games to make, and they probably would be profitable or whatever, but I'm just not, I can't bring myself to start working on those because I can't bring myself to spend a year of my life making something that's 80% like other things I've already seen before. I just can't do it. I need it to be brand new because I don't know. I'm just weird about that. And also I just feel like games have this giant curse right now of being unbelievably repetitive and copying each other. And I just can't stand it. We need to stop doing this as the world, and I can't contribute to that. Honestly, I feel like I feel if I released a game that was pretty successful and was mostly copying other games, I would be ashamed of that because that is I think is a very, very big problem with video games, and I would be ashamed to contribute to that. So I don't know. Yeah. I just have a mental hang up about it.
Yeah,
I'd
that
like
makes
to ask
sense.
a question on that note, if that's all right.
Please, totally.
Do you know, I imagine that like making a video game is iterative. Like you said, you'll do something and then acknowledge that it doesn't work and scrap it. Is there any chance that you might stumble onto something innovative in pursuing something that seems repetitive in the beginning?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand. I'm sorry.
I guess I'm asking. You know, you have ideas you're compelled by, but they seem too familiar to you to start on them. But you're also describing other games where you put something that, I don't know, I think of Faulkner's quote that's always like, kill your darlings. And when you have an element of the game and you have to look at it objectively and say, this isn't working. But so that's where I'm getting that there's an iterative process to this. Like, as in there's different versions as you're crafting it. And so if you were to start with something that you're excited by, but that seems too repetitive or too done already, that in the process, by virtue of your taste and who you are, you might end up creating something innovative out of that.
I think actually, I don't know, this is kind of just sort of, I feel like this gets a little too far off from related to stuff we should be talking about, so I don't want to rant about it too much, but no, I just feel like that's just kind of a personal thing. I think that's sort of a crutch right now. Like, I feel like in terms of creativity, it's very hard to get away from conventions. I feel like in all creativity, because first of all, like, conventions aren't just like copying people for no reason. Conventions, I don't know. I'm going to go off on a whole topic that's not super relevant, and it's all just my stuff. So I don't want to go on about it for too long. But
I'd like to respond to what we were talking about just a moment ago, or actually what you brought up, Phil. Is I relate to what you're saying so deeply because, like for example, I fell in love with like slacklining was my first passion that like found me. I found it, whatever. And then I realized I wanted to be a performance artist through slackline, like dance on the slackline. And I've been practicing this for years and years, but I don't feel that, like, if I see myself, I don't see the fluidity and the grace that I, as the creator and the artist, know that I have the ability to continue to stay in. However, people will come up to me and be like, well, I'll come to the park to watch you and be mesmerized by you. And I love that, and it feels good that it inspires the public. But I'm always wondering, I'm like, well, am I insecure? Is it my insecurity keeping me from sharing this? Or is it my really like zero compromise, like until I create this thing that I really truly know that I can, then I don't really feel compelled to share it.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, like, I think that perfectionism, I mean, that's kind of what perfectionism in general is how I would maybe summarize what you're saying right there is like, I think perfectionism is mostly bullshit. I think there are versions of perfectionism that are, what I mean by that is I think perfectionism is based on fear.
Well,
Almost all.
So what I'm asking you though is what's the difference between your notion of perfectionism and then the idea of you being like, well, this game needs to be just this way for me, like for me to put out.
To want to do it. I mean,
because it needs to be a certain level of complete, right? In order for, like, as the creator, in order to share it. So there is kind of an element of, like, maybe not perfection, but, like, you see what I'm saying?
yeah, I guess I'm having a hard time. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess there is a degree of my ego, and I mean, obviously, there's a degree of my ego involved when I'm saying like, I would be embarrassed to make a game that's not super creative, because you know, I mean, sure they can be good, whatever. Oh, this is a men's only group. Who's Charlotte?
Transition.
So,
What's up, Ray?
I
I
think
self-identify as a male.
I think Peter had a phenomenal question, which let me scroll back up to it.
Is the artist ever satisfied?
Well, that, and then also he said, well, so then how do you determine what goals are worthy of action? Which I think is a really good question. So Phil, maybe I want to try to back you into a corner here of, okay, well then what, to Peter's point, like what would be worthy of action?
So, I mean, I'm super embarrassed fucking talking about games because I don't know. I just feel like I'm wasting you guys' time, but stuff that's not super relevant. But like, I don't know, like, just stuff that feels very new to me. Stuff that, like, you know, since I play so many games and I make games, like I'm very familiar with all the conventions and stuff, and I just want to make stuff that's very free of conventions, very free of like, you know, like people like I was talking about this last night. People like it's somehow I don't know why I don't know what's happened to the whole creative industry. Like there's so many sequels these days. Do you guys notice that?
Yeah.
Like
Yep.
Movies for some I don't know why they stopped making new movies. Like it's just as expensive. I don't know why they all like everything now is a sequel. It's kind of weird, and I feel like people are getting. I hope.
Yep.
What's the reason?
Yeah, it's more guaranteed revenue. Actually, I heard somebody talking about this probably a year ago, who was involved in the Hollywood industry, and that's exactly it. Like when you already know that you have an idea that works, and you can just sort of perpetuate it.
I mean, we've had beloved IP for 100 years. Why is that new? Is it because it must be because streaming? I feel like it might be because streaming steals so much of their revenue. Basically.
Yeah, I think the stakes are higher now, where it's like, hey, if you're going to be still dumping a lot of money into this, they're more risk averse because you're going through a tidal wave of change right now in the creative space. So it's like, well, if we're going to drop.
Sales are dead.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, DVD sales. Yeah,
they made their money in a flop. They made their money off DVDs in a flop.
Yeah, it's dude, it's like these tech companies are just like a virus. They're just like sucking up all the revenue. Anyway, no, but like, yeah, like I hope people keep getting sick of sequels because I hope they stop going and paying for them because it's so annoying. Like, I don't want to watch the 80th reboot of Spider-Man where it's like Spider-Man again and Spider-Man meets the old Spider-Man. It's like, what the fuck are we doing?
Feel that.
Like, no, I don't know. Like, it's just my own.
Yeah,
I don't know how to answer it other than it's just my own judgment, you know.
Can I ask one quick question to Phil before we got to go?
Yep.
I mean, first of all, I love hearing Phil talk because his train of thought is just so different than mine, and it really is interesting. I find it very interesting. And I'm just out of curiosity, this may be irrelevant to the podcast, but like, Phil, what's a game that you feel like would be worthy of your name that is out there now? Like, is there an example of a game that you feel like would be groundbreaking? Because is it just hard to be creative when there's so many titles out?
What is a game that someone else made that I'm proud that I think is impressive?
Like if you would have made it, that you'd be proud to say that, oh, I made that game. I think that's what Rob's asking. I think.
That is exactly what I'm asking.
I mean, there's a bunch of games. They're obscure bullshit stuff, small games you guys haven't heard of, but
Hipster.
there's a lot. There's a couple games. And it's not. No, actually, I think it's easier now to be creative than ever if you learn how to do it. People. So this is the thing. Is like I think social media has created this situation where there's the total possible space of ideas. Like there's like these spotlights. There's like these giant floodlights on certain ideas. Like YouTubers will learn about this one concept and then make a popular video, and everyone just copies them because YouTube is just all about like copying these days. And like, so it's just like they just mine the shit out of the one little veins of ideas that they find, and every other idea is just like they don't even know that it exists. And like so many people are so like attached to like virality these days that everyone just copies that like. I think it's easier than ever to be creative. Like, I think the reason why my game was successful is only because I tried to be creative. It's not because I'm like particularly good at anything. I just wanted to be creative and I just stuck to it. And then people were like, oh, this is cool. It's kind of unique. And it's like, it's not because I'm like good at stuff. It's just because like I just tried. And I know I kind of probably sound like kind of an asshole when I say this, but no one is trying. No one is trying. It's not that it's pretty easy to be creative if you just get outside of social media, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think to Peter's question, I think it's pretty brilliant in the fact that it's so simplistic, because I've noticed two patterns. And by the way, Phil, that I'm not saying that you or anybody else is doing this, but I have been in a pattern before where a mentor told me, he's like, hey, I heard this great quote. It was like, if you argue for your weaknesses, you get to keep them. Because everybody else around you is going to say, okay, cool, like I believe you. Like you suck. Okay, great, you can't do this. And again, Phil, that's not me saying that that's what you're doing, but it's like it's bringing up a pattern for me that I think a lot of the guys would learn from. And then the other part is a constant. I think it's almost the human condition to move the goalpost because we're constantly fighting against this tug of war of like either to confront the work that's hard with the pain that comes along with it, or I move the goalpost and justify why that wasn't the real goal to begin with. Do you know what I mean? Like this constant moving target. So those two patterns I've had to fight against like basically every single day of my life, right? Like not going deep into like my weaknesses and then arguing everybody else's help around me. And then also setting a target and knowing that the goal is through the process, as cliche as it sounds, despite how many freaking times, which is every day, I want to change the target. Daniel, can you relate to any of those or comment on any of those patterns? Oh, Daniel, did you hear me, bud?
No, it cut out for me.
Oh, so those two patterns, if you heard them, can you comment on any of that? Either arguing for your weaknesses and therefore you get to keep them because nobody's going to want to keep on telling you, hey, no, you actually are good, right? At some point, people are going to believe you or just not want to do the work, right, to keep on arguing you if you're going to argue against yourself. And then number two, the human condition of like wanting, just constantly changing the target because it's always easy to start the newer thing because you don't know of the path ahead that it's going to have the same pains of the path that you just deserted. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and you're thinking about these in terms of just what gets in the way of somebody succeeding, where they're, or is moving the goalpost an obstacle success, or is it incremental successes? I guess is what I'm trying to clarify.
It's a red herring in my view, it's a red herring to get us out of the work that we signed up for previously. So, for instance, to Peter's question, which was a brilliant question, like, okay, well then, hey, how do you determine the goals that are worthy of action? Because I've noticed a pattern with myself and with other people of like, they set a goal that's worthy of action, but then 4 weeks later, for some reason, that goal is no longer worthy of action. Well, what was it? You know, and then that person did the same thing 10 weeks prior to that and 2 years prior to that. No different than the guy who gets caught up in just perpetually dating new girls because he knows all of the problems of the old girl, pretending that there's some perfect girl out there, sort of thing.
I think what this question, at least the second part of the question, is asking about is the level of analysis, because you could argue that a person is just rapid testing. You could argue that they're prototyping, iterating, and then being like, that's not it for me. Or you could think, they're running out of steam and they're being distracted. And again, I tend to have maybe more of a spiritual woo-woo, like metaphysical bent, where I do think there are ways you can miss what's coming for you in your life. I think but I think that with intention and effort, which probably sounds too reductive, but with intention and effort, you can generally get to where you're trying to go. And I think that I guess what I'm trying to say is I think that looks different for a lot of different people. Just in terms of relationships, as a quick example, like, I'd hopped around quite a bit, and then finally I was like, I'm the problem here. I'm not digging my heels in with anybody. I'm walking away at the first sign of trouble. And so the person I met before I met my wife, I did that with, and it was terrible. It was completely not worthy of the effort put into it. And the rationale at the time was like, well, I'm learning tools to, like if this doesn't work out, because there were signs it wasn't going to, then at least I'm building like the person that can do these things. And I think maybe there's a little truth in that, but the broader truth is that when I met my wife, I didn't need any of that. Like there was something so completely different from what I anticipated, that the tools I had spent my time cultivating were not necessary. So it's, again, maybe that's a false positive for my worldview, but that's kind of where I come down. Like I'm a faith-based person. So that's how I move through the world.
No, I mean, that makes sense. And Robert and I had a conversation not too long ago of like, I agree with you. Like at some point it makes sense to go to the buffet of life and try as many things as possible because you don't have a palate yet. But at some point, right, you got to stop dabbling. Like at some point it crosses into the territory of you're just constantly hunting for nuance rather than actual like progress. But Ray, you raised your hand, brother, and you are on mute. What do you got, buddy?
Yeah, sorry for being so late, guys. It's 6:30 p.m. here in Venice, Italy, which is lovely this time of year, by the way. But we may have gone over this before. We've gone over it in past sessions, but Wes, I think to the question, what goals are worthy of pursuing? I think if they are congruent with your values, that is kind of the first kind of test they must survive. And so like I think you and me and Matt McCusker talked about this because he brought values to the conversation a lot in the early days of this men's group. Like just like we need to take time to think about our goals, write them out, create vision boards. Values work, like what are my values? Do I want to be and I mean you can just Google like list of values, and it's like courageous, loyal, generous, and it's kind of tough because my first instinct was to check off all the good qualities, but it takes a little time. Like let's suppose you can't have all the values on the list, maybe pick your top 10, and and then so in terms of like getting laid or being monogamous, if your values are always having fun and being fun loving versus being super loyal and a family man, I think that can be a good compass for which goals are worth pursuing.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And what I hear from you, and we'll go round table here, final words of wisdom here, but what's coming up for me, Ray, of what you're saying is I hear Phil saying, hey, one of my values is like the creation of something that didn't exist, at least a certain degree away, certain number of standard deviations away from what's already out there. What I would add to that for me is congruency with values, but then also it has to land in somebody's lap, and me attempting to give them value within a certain time frame. Like I have to ship something and it land in somebody else's lap, and attempting to give them value in a reasonable time. Like that for me is like, I know it's not super precise, but that's enough to like get me up in the morning and say like, I'm out to serve the community, because that's how humans survive, you know, and that's what makes me feel good when somebody says, hey, Wes, you did a good job. As primitive as it might sound, it's like, okay, awesome. Like that produced value for Rob, et cetera. So Rob, let me throw it over to you, man. Final words of wisdom.
I guess don't let perfection get in the way of starting a pursuit. I feel like that's something that I could take to heart, and I'm sure based on what I've heard today, we could all potentially take to heart.
Or not finishing a pursuit, if you don't mind me adding that.
There you go. And for some of us, that's the better way of saying it.
Hell yeah. Arjuna, let me throw you the ball, buddy.
Yeah, I'd say self-compassion, but don't be without apathy. And yeah, the more you get out there, the more you can refine what it is that you really are after.
Hell yeah. Daniel?
I love the values piece. I think trusting in your values and being aligned with those is super important. And then I think also remembering that we tend to construct stories looking backwards. So the story of our lives make a lot more sense looking at what we did rather than looking at what we're doing right now.
Love it. Hell yeah. Phil, you got the final word, brother.
Yeah, I appreciate what this talking today reminded me that when I feel like I'm kind of lost on like what the way forwards is, the solution usually is like try stuff, and if it doesn't work, you throw it out and you try some more stuff. And for some reason, I always forget that. I always feel like there isn't a solution. Like that's the way it feels. And even though I know that process would work, so I just need to remember to do that more, I guess.
Hell yeah.
Just one quick word to Phil, by the way. I feel like I enjoy when you chat, dude. Like I feel like we all get value out of it. You're not rambling. Like it's fascinating stuff.
I appreciate that. When I say I'm rambling, it's because sometimes when I say that, it's because I could accidentally talk for half an hour about stuff that has nothing to do with any of you guys' lives. So
don't worry, Ray will cut you off well before that happens.
Yeah, I was gonna say just ask Wes about interest rates, and he'll forget to eat for like 3 days. He talks so much.
All right, dudes. I love you guys. Thank you, guys. I will see you on Monday. Later, dudes.
Later, guys.
I gotta get back on my boat. All right, bye, boys.
Love y'all.
Be super. Yeah.